Welcome to the Schwartz Advisors Report from Aftermarket News. I'm Maddie Weiner, and today I'm joined by Derek Kaufman, Managing Partner at Schwartz Advisors. Derek, thanks for joining us today.
It's great to be here, Maddie. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
Same here. And, I know Schwartz Advisors maintains a powertrain forecast that predicts how battery electric vehicles, or BEVs, will enter new car sales and the VIO. Can you explain how that forecast is compiled?
Sure. Over my working career, I've had the opportunity to work with both internal combustion engines, or ICE, and the BEV platforms. And I've maintained relationships over the years with tier one and tier two suppliers in the industry, the people who are working on future developments. I even had a hand way back in 2011 in the rollout of the Smart 4.2 electric drive car. And I took that thing all over the country. And I was very involved working with ChargePoint at that time. So that was, really early on. And then I've had some background in battery, running a battery lab for Mission Motors. So I've been in this area, and that informs the forecast as we build it.
So, Derek, we've certainly seen a lot of headlines in the last few weeks about frozen Teslas not being able to charge and negative reports on wavering demand for Ford's Lightning pickup truck. Are the recent headlines affecting your forecast, and have you changed it since you originated it?
It's really interesting. We need, if you're running a forecast, you need to avoid the noise of the moment. You can't let that affect the forecast model. But that said, we see the forecast as an evergreen prediction. So we're constantly updating it as we learn about new battery technology, or we see, last year's numbers on BEV cars, that type of thing. So from the start, we've been much more conservative, I think, in our prediction of the BEV take rates, because I think we know about the difficulties that they'd face in range and charger availability and weather challenges, just like we saw in the last few weeks in Chicago. So we are more conservative going forward.
Got it. Okay. So with Schwartz Advisors' model, how does it differ from EPA or California's CARB targets?
It's a good question. First of all, the targets vary. So President Biden's, talked about a 50% of all car sales to be BEVs by 2030. Then in April, the EPA came out and they showed a target of 67% by 2032. And then we always have CARB in California. They have a mandate of a ZEV, or zero emission level in 100% by 2035. Mm-hmm. So our forecast, we're below those numbers. So we show 25.8% of new car sales in 2030, about 30.6 in 2032, and then 40% in 2035. So we think it's a better representation, I guess, of technological reality.
Yeah, for sure. And then down the line in the aftermarket, those vehicles won't necessarily, or may not necessarily, be serviced by an aftermarket professional until maybe a couple of years down the line. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think we're looking at how they're maintained. We understand that a BEV will require less maintenance, but I think some of the numbers that people are talking about, 60 and 70%, are only in the consumables in the car, just the preventative maintenance thing. As far as overall service, we're more like 30% different than an ICE car. And there's a lot of barriers, to the adoption of BEVs themselves. Starting with the chargers.
Okay, yeah. If you can go into some other key barriers of BEV adoption, I'd be curious to know a little bit more about what you're seeing.
Yeah. So we have about 200,000 chargers in the country. And that's not been a problem. The early adopters coming into BEVs, first of all, they're higher income people. They live in houses. 80% of charging is done at home. But as you come into the early majority of the Gordon Moore curve, you're going to get into a situation where more people in apartments have BEVs, and they're going to need public charging solutions. So the IRA Act, promised $7.5 billion to bring 500,000 chargers online. That was almost 2 years ago, I think. And
Mhm.
to date, to my knowledge, there's been one installed under that money, and I think it was actually done in Cleveland, or at least in Ohio, in
Okay.
December, right? So, we understand that private companies are bringing them out, so it's not just the federal government. But I think we're caught in a trap here because the OEMs are trying, or vehicle manufacturers are trying to drive down the price of BEVs to make them
Mhm.
more affordable, right? So they've turned to LFP, lithium iron phosphate batteries, to reduce the cost. But the lower cost comes with lower range, so now you need
Right.
more chargers. So, we're in a little bit of a do loop. I have no doubt that this will work itself out,
Mhm.
and will convert, a good portion of new car sales to BEVs. But I think we need more time to ramp it efficiently and cost effectively. I'd say this, that, the EPA doesn't actually dictate what type of powertrain technology is needed for zero emissions. So I think there
Mm.
are several internal combustion engine, or ICE, solutions out there that can be in the game for a very long time, and we have them in our forecast.
Oh, that's interesting. So, yeah, tell me more about the, future of internal combustion from your view.
Sure. So in our forecast, we're talking about the VIO now. We
Right.
show about 7.4% of cars in the road by 2030 will be BEVs. That moves to 15%, 15.5 by 2035, and on up to about 26.5% in 2040. So even in 2040, we show 73.5% of the cars on the road to be ICE for several reasons.
Mhm.
Number one, we think there are several fuels out there that have the potential to be either carbon neutral or near zero emissions. We talk about e-fuels, for example. We're up to, I think, 185 companies now that have joined the e-fuel alliance. And that
Wow.
Germany and some other countries kind of pushed back against the EU last year to stop the BEV mandate by 2030 or 2035,
Mhm.
and allow carbon neutral e-fuels to be counted with ICE engines. So what they do is they combine hydrogen and CO2 to form synthetic gasoline. And that's essentially a drop-in fuel, so you don't have to change the engines in the car. What you
Okay.
do need to make it, though, is renewable electricity to form the hydrogen to make it a climate, neutral solution. So that's number one. Then the number
Interesting.
two is that there's a whole continuum of ICE fuels behind that, like renewable diesel and biodiesel and renewable natural gas and hydrogen infused gas and diesel fuel cells. So the whole thing comes down basically to refining capacity and the
Right.
challenge of having enough renewable electrical power to produce the green hydrogen that we need.
So, Derek, that seems the same whether you're talking about the production of fuels or having enough electricity to power the grid to charge all of the BEVs. Is that correct?
Exactly. I mean, it's all about a race to producing fuel capacity, whether that fuel is a liquid, that goes into an ICE engine, or it's electrical fuel for BEV batteries. So, look, I have no doubt. I hear people talk about, well, the grid can't handle BEVs. I don't think that's true. Is we use about 4 trillion kilowatt hours of energy in the country right now. Well, that's up about 400% since the 1960s. It's a growth rate of something like 40% a decade.
Hmm.
So now, add a whole bunch of BEVs to the road, and let's say 50% of the VIO is electric. We think that is about 2x of what we have from electrical power now. So we have to double it. Well, that's about 25% per decade growth. So it's a completely doable number.
Yeah.
The thing you have to realize, though, is it doesn't account for all the other electrical conversions that maybe governmental mandates will make in industry. Look at artificial intelligence. That could alone, by itself, could add about 25%, to the demand. For fuels, it's
Okay.
the same thing. We need to ramp hydrogen production, e-fuel refining capacity, renewable diesel. But I actually think those ramps are a lot easier than the BEV charger ramp because the construction can be concentrated and controlled by individual businesses and not run through a whole bunch of public and municipal permitting processes. So, we work with a lot of people in the aftermarket, and we're hearing all kinds of horror stories from dealerships that their OEM parents are telling them to put in X number of chargers, and only to be told by their electrical utility that they've got a 2-year wait, to get the infrastructure in place. So what we're calling for here is a more logical ramp to make this efficient and cost effective.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So how will it all play out, do you think?
Well, I think that whether it's chargers or carbon neutral fuels, it's about getting that longer time to ramp, number one. And number two, I think we should be talking more as an industry about carbon capture as opposed to greenhouse gases. So I really think that as we're getting into, say, the 2040s, after we run through the next decade or so, I think we're going to realize that what we've been talking about here hasn't been as much about climate change as it's been about sustainability. And sustainability is more about carbon capture than it is GHG reduction. I mean, there are thousands of companies out there working on carbon capture. By the way, they all need fossil fuels, to do that. But we're also running toward an electric future, mining lithium and placing solar panels and windmills. But my personal opinion is we're reaching a point where we're realizing that we're in the process of killing the environment to save the climate. And we ought to pull back from that. And the auto aftermarket has a real role to play, in my opinion. We talk about the emerging circular aftermarket with our clients.
Yeah.
One where remanufacturing, recycling take all new importance. I noticed that MEMA is now focusing a lot on sustainability. So I think the circular aftermarket and sustainability are the same thing, and we're going to see a major emphasis on that in the next years.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And you already see the associations really putting an emphasis on it as well. But I'm curious, how do you see that forming, that circular aftermarket?
Well, for many years, tier 1 and tier 2 automotive suppliers have, we've shipped all of parts to China to be knocked off for lower prices. And over a 30 or 40-year period, thousands of jobs went to low-cost countries, and they weren't subjected to the climate considerations or legislation that we are. Plus, we gave away much of the expertise in the design of the parts themselves. Well, then the shock of COVID and the supply chain breaking down on us suddenly woke people up, right? We're not controlling our own destiny. And now we hear aftermarket people talking about bringing manufacturing back to North America. I think that won't happen in totality, but I think it can happen. And then I think that holding China to the same climate regulations that we abide by is another step that's really essential. I guess what I see happening is the formation of climate impact balance sheets attached to every vehicle and every part. So every material from its origin to its use, all the way through its life, to its end of life, and then remanufacturing or reclaiming it back to its mineral state is what we're going to be about in the future. I think it actually starts with the battery passports for electric cars. So in order to qualify for the $7,500 credit, you need to qualify for what mineral percentage is in that battery. Well, you've got to track all that and make sure it's coming from free trade agreement countries. The only way you're going to do that is with some type of tracking mechanism, and I think that is battery passports. I think it's climate balance sheets. I mean, Daimler's had a climate balance sheet for years. That's how they've ended up with flaxseed and bamboo and hemp and PET plastics, and what's that Milo replacement for leather in the seats. So they've been doing this for years. BMW is using blockchain technology right now to track every component with full visibility for all the stakeholders in every step. So its South Carolina plant is working with Rio Tinto in Canada. They're using hydroelectric power and 50% recycled aluminum to make aluminum parts in their smelter in Canada for BMW. Well, the blockchain can track that and document a 70% reduction in CO2 with full provenance and ESG compliance for BMW. So
Wow.
remember blockchains. It's going to be part of our future. Drop in some artificial intelligence along the way, and I think you've got a really interesting future for the aftermarket. Land more jobs in North America.
And, that should be really attractive to young people looking to fill those jobs.
Love it. I mean, BEV technology, ICE powertrains, right? Fuel chemistries, climate sustainability, blockchain algorithms. I mean, the auto aftermarket is a very high-tech place, and it ought to attract young people in droves. I think the auto aftermarket is where it's at.
Perfect. Yeah, I completely agree. Well, Derek, thanks for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, man. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. See ya.